Hello and welcome to this, our opening day of the National Concert Hall International Master Course. My co-artistic director, Finghin Collins, and I are delighted to be in live conversation with Vice President of Artistic Operations of the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, Katie McGuinness. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank the National Concert Hall and everyone working behind the scenes to enable this year's course to happen. And I would also like to thank our sponsors, including Michael Sheridan and TJ O'Connor and Associates. Thank you very much, Finghin. It's lovely to see you.
And Gwendolyn, lovely to be with you. And I would like now to extend a welcome to our very special guest, and that is somebody who we have known for a very long time, Katie McGuinness from Dublin originally. But as you say, Katie has recently been announced as the new Wildenthal family's Vice President of Artistic Operations at the Dallas Symphony Orchestra in the States. So Katie will work closely with Fabio Luisi, the principal conductor of the orchestra, the music director, as well as with the principal Pops Conductor Jeff Tyzik, to create multi-season classical and pops programming and events. So a really major and significant appointment. We are so deeply proud of Katie in Dublin. Before this, Katie has been the Director of Artistic Planning at the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, appointed in 2017. As head of that department, she has been responsible for planning and programming the classical season, subscription series, summer classical concerts, happy hour series, and overseeing the educational concert programming of that orchestra. Prior to that, in December 2013, she was appointed Executive Assistant to the Senior Vice President of Artistic Planning at the Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra, was soon promoted to Manager of Artistic Administration there. So she's had a stellar career in the orchestral field since she's been in the States. Before that, she was a piano student here in Dublin at the Royal Irish Academy of Music. She studied with Dr. John O'Connor, with whom I also studied, so we have a lot in common. She spent 2 summers working for the Aspen Music Festival. She accepted an offer to work for Harrison Parrott Agency, artist management company in London in 2011. And she has progressed from all of that to the dizzy heights now of this major position at the Dallas Symphony Orchestra. And it gives both Gwendolyn and me enormous pleasure to welcome you, Katie, to our conversation as part of our National Concert Hall International Master Course. Thank you for taking the time to join us. And
it's my pleasure.
Our first question to you is, take us back to Dublin and to your studies with John O'Connor in Dublin, and what was that like and how it led to the next steps in your career?
Oh, thanks so much to you both for such a lovely, warm welcome and introduction. It really is my pleasure to be here. I wish so much that I was sitting in my home in Dublin, having this Zoom chat right now, but sadly, both my husband and I are unable to get back home at the moment, but fear not, it'll eventually pass and we'll be able to get home again. So it really is such a pleasure, so special actually, to be able to have this time with both of you. And it's interesting that you say, take us back to your youth in Dublin, when actually I was just thinking about it while I was waiting patiently with my camera off. I was thinking, actually, it's funny to have this chat with both of you because you're so much a part of my youth, actually. I mean, Finghin, I remember the first time waiting for a lesson with the great Dr. John O'Connor, very nervous, very excited for my lesson. And you were before me, and your sweet mother was there talking to my mum, and they were chatting it up, and you were playing the Dante Sonata, I believe. And such a powerful musician you were, still are, that the frame fell off the wall.
Oh my God.
And I just thought to myself, God, I'm terrified. How can I follow that? And you were always just such an inspiration to me through those lessons. And then Gwendolyn, I mean, your mum, your dad, my sister, Gina McGuinness, she's a superb violinist, and she studied with your mum. And I remember being equally terrified of your mum, but also so inspiring. I mean, both your mum and your father, just to inspire both myself and my sister to really try hard and to practice and really dedicate ourselves to it. I mean, the amount of Sunday afternoons we had in our home with your dad, having masterclasses, and myself and my sister, we played together so much. So you asked me about my youth. I mean, I started playing piano, I think at the age of 4. I think my mom thinks maybe 3, but I think at the age of 4, but she's probably right. And started playing piano at a very young age, started with Suzuki first, with Emer Black, beautiful piano teacher who really helped me to kind of tune my ears. And then I studied with Ursula Killeen for a couple of years, and I wanted to get into the Royal Irish Academy of Music. And it's kind of a funny story because my father, both my parents are doctors, and my father had a patient by the name of Dr. Mary O'Connor. And he was seeing Dr. Mary O'Connor, who of course is John's wife. And they happened to be talking, John and my dad, one day. And my dad said, you know, my daughter's actually a pianist and she'd love to study at the Royal Irish Academy of Music. Can you suggest somebody that she should go and study with? And John said, of course, why doesn't she come in and play for me? And I'll suggest a teacher that she can go and study with. So Ursula Killeen prepped me. I played a Beethoven sonata. I can't remember which one. I played a Beethoven sonata for him, and Ursula Killeen prepped me for the lesson and went in and I played for him. And at the end, he said, why don't you come and study with me? And that, I think I was 11 at the time. And that changed my life. From that moment, I knew I was going to be a musician. I mean, it really, you both know this so well because you would have had the exact same experience. You know at a very young age that that is what you're going to do. And so when it comes to the time of the leaving certificate and everyone's saying, oh, where are you going to study? What are you going to do? I mean, by the time you're 17, 18, you've already decided when you're 10 or 11, oh, I'm going to be a musician. So really that's, you know, how my youth was. I did festivals all throughout Europe and I did some festivals in the States. And then I got into the Bachelor of Arts degree at the Royal Irish Academy of Music to study there with, of course, John O'Connor and the incredible Therese Fahy. She did so much for me. I started studying with her halfway through the bachelor's degree. And actually, you know, honestly, she saved me because I really needed somebody to work intensively with me and to really kind of help me blossom. And she did so much. She's a beautiful pianist and an incredible teacher. And I miss her and John very, very much.
Oh, it's wonderful to hear you talking about these stories. Actually, it makes me feel very young. I remember a lot of these things and a lot of these moments. And I don't remember asking myself as a young person what I was going to be, probably because, like you say, we kind of knew it. I also don't remember asking myself where we're going to end up. And I wonder at which point did you feel, Katie, that you were going to shift from wanting to play piano, to perform, to be in that environment and moving into artistic management?
It was a gradual move, actually. So after I finished my bachelor's in Dublin, thanks to the help of Anne Fuller, I was able to get a Fulbright scholarship. And so I went to study at Indiana University in Bloomington, which is interesting how life brought me back to Indiana again, but that's how life goes. And so I went to pursue my master's in piano performance at the Jacob School of Music at IU in Bloomington. And when I headed off there, I had been playing a lot of chamber music with my sister Gina, and I knew I was not going to be Finghin Collins. I knew the frame would never fall off the wall for my performance. And I, you know, like Finghin just played with at Wigmore Hall. I knew that that was not going to happen. And John knew that, and Therese knew that. And so, but I had been playing a lot of chamber music with my sister. And I enjoyed that so much, you know, thanks to Ronald, thanks to your dad, and really kind of enjoyed that collaboration. And both she and I kind of had that vision that maybe we would create some sort of duo or trio. So when I went to IU, that was the plan. And then about, probably at the end of the first year, it was a 2-year master's. At the end of the first year, I met my now husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, and he was performing Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto. And how it works in American schools, which is actually a very smart thing to do, is they do these ad hoc recitals. I don't know, but maybe they do them in Europe as well, but I just knew it from America. And what they do is you get the orchestra, you pull the orchestra together yourself as a student. So you have to go around and recruit the musicians to be the orchestra that you perform your concerto with. And you pair up with one of the student conductors, and then it's a whole big concert. And he was doing this for the Tchaikovsky Piano Concerto. And he's actually, now he's not, but at the time he was quite shy. And that is not necessarily one of my qualities, being shy. So I really went around, and I had a lot of friends, and I encouraged people to come, and I created posters for the concert and created a post-concert event for it. And I loved it. And then people started saying to me, you know, that's actually a career. You can do that. And I never knew that. And that is the one thing that to this day, I continue to try to say to music students, you know, if you don't want to be a performer, that doesn't mean that you then have to become an engineer, with no disrespect to engineers. But it doesn't mean that you all of a sudden have to just drop it. And I never knew that. And so I thought, wow, you can do this. You can actually make this a career. So it was just a little seed of an idea in that first year. Then the second year of the Masters, I was continuing to try to practice, try to play Mazeppa really badly, you know, doing all of my different studies, Chopin etudes, doing my Masters recitals, but this seed was still in my head. And so for the third year, while I was there, I did a performance diploma, and Dimitri was able to stay too for that performance diploma. And in that third year, I was able to take classes in the arts management degree at IU. And I was awful, absolutely awful, had no idea what I was doing. I mean, honestly sat there saying, what is an Excel document? What is a budget? What is a contract? No idea. And completely obnoxious, such a performer in amongst all these arts management majors. And I was like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm a performer. It was really quite humbling, actually. I learned a lot through that. And they then said, well, what you need to do is volunteer for everything and anything possible. And after that third year for the performance diploma, I moved back to Ireland to do my doctorate in piano performance. So it still wasn't really, there wasn't much traction. I mean, it's a big move to make. And when you're a pianist since the age of 3 or 4, that's quite a hard transition to make, actually. So when I went home and I said it to John, I said to John, you know, do you think maybe it might be a good idea for me to sort of test the waters with arts management? And of course, in true John fashion, he knew it all along. He knew that that was destined for me all along. You know, he had seen that through me throughout the bachelor's. And then obviously we kept in touch, and I took classes with him at the Aspen Music Festival. And he smiled and he said, I was wondering when this moment was going to happen, when you would come in and say, you want to do arts management. I think you'd be great at it, and let me help you. So he connected me with people at the Aspen Music Festival. I worked for the summer of 2010 there, and then again for 2011, all the while still doing my doctorate. But really it was after the second summer there in 2011, I was the orchestra manager for the Aspen Concert Orchestra. And I just loved every minute of it. And that was really the moment when I realized, you know, this is what I want to do. And right prior to that, I fortunately, thanks to John again, had been connected with Irla Carter, who is a director at Harrison Parrott, and he connected me with Linda Marks, and then I got the job there and slowly made that transition to the arts management world, because I just knew I could be yet another pianist, and I would probably have been an okay pianist, or I could use my musicianship, I could use my experience as a performer, and I could use my interpersonal skills, which just comes naturally if you're born in Ireland, it seems. I could use all of those skills to really make a difference in the classical music world. And really ever since, I've not looked back.
It's wonderful, Katie. And it, of course, as you say, all these transitions are always incredibly gradual. You know, you don't just decide overnight, I'm going to stop playing and become a manager. It's a very gradual process, and you've described it so eloquently there. Yeah. And then tell us a little bit about London then and Harrison Parish. And I know that your career has very much ended up stateside with orchestras, which is quite different from the London world and the management of artists, I suppose. They're two different sides of maybe the same coin. But that was your first dip into professional life
Yeah.
as an arts manager. So I'd say that too was a learning experience.
Oh, very much so. I mean, so I flew over to London to have a meeting with Irla and Linda Marks. And it's really too long a story to say, but if Irla is watching this, which I'm sure he's not, but if he's watching it, he'll laugh because I was 40 minutes late for my interview, believe it or not. I could not find the office of Harrison Parish because I don't know if you've ever been there, but now they've moved, but it's tucked into this old place, Albion Court. And really, I mean, it was disastrous. I was 40 minutes late. And I remember arriving and seeing Irla and him just looking at me going, wow, best of luck. But luckily I got it. I still got the job, thankfully. And so I worked for Linda Marks, who still is very much in the industry. She's now created her own agency, actually. Very, very smart, experienced, powerful woman. And I worked as her personal assistant and then an assistant artist manager looking after a number of different artists. And really, I was only with Harrison Parish for about a year and a couple of months. It was a great experience because it threw me right into the classical music business, you know, understanding the business aspects of it, how to negotiate fees, how to pitch an artist, how to connect with a promoter and try to kind of encourage them to take the artist and set up programs and all that stuff. So it really taught me the logistics. But I didn't stay very long for one main reason, and that was that I was sitting at a desk in an office in London, and I was arriving on a Monday morning and leaving on a Friday evening, and then at home for the weekend, maybe going to a concert in London if I could afford it, because you really do not get paid much. I'm working for an agency as an assistant artist manager, which Finghin, your brother, would certainly have known very well. I'm sure he went through the same pathway, and it's very hard as an assistant artist manager. You know, you really don't get paid much at all. So when you're looking after these artists, it's amazing. You know, I looked after the incredible Norwegian cellist Truls Mørk. He was one of my favorite artists, but he was off playing with NHK in Japan. And I would plan the whole thing and where he was staying and when he was arriving and when his rehearsal and what he was playing and all of that. But then the concert would happen and I left the office on Friday at 6 o'clock and I went home and I watched TV. And I just thought, hang on, that's not quite why I left the performance world. I didn't leave it to do that, which Linda was so supportive of, and she understood that. You know, with time in the arts management world, as you climb, you know, you do then start to travel and see your artists all around the world, but it takes time to get there. And I guess I'm not a very patient person. So I said to her, I said, you know, I'm not sure if this is quite what I want to do. I know I want arts management, but I think I really want to be on the promoter side. And I spoke to Kira Higgins actually a lot about it, and she gave me great advice. She was so supportive because, of course, she's so experienced herself on that side of the business. And so we talked a lot, and I talked to Linda, and I said, and I think I really want to move back to the US. My husband and I loved our time there, and we felt so welcomed. And it really is, I know it sounds cliche, and I know it's sometimes interpreted as being superficial, but it really is a very positive and innovative and adventurous place. I mean, there's really anything you can put on the table here in the US, and they'll say, yeah, how do we do that? How do we do that? You know, and and then you find a funder for it. Next thing you're doing it. And I still like that atmosphere. So I knew I wanted to get back to the US, and I knew I wanted to be with an orchestra because I wanted to sit in on rehearsals. And I wanted to watch concerts every Friday and Saturday night. And that's what got me to leave HP and then move to the US and try to get the job with Pittsburgh Symphony. But even in that short time with HP, I learned so much. And that sort of that really became the foundation of my career and why I've been able to succeed. Because so often people refer to that time. They say, oh, you were at Harrison Parrott for a little over a year. They knew that you must have learned a lot in that year. And I really did. I mean, it's a tough job, and I really did.
Mm.
So you described this time working with artists as a manager, as an artistic manager. And you've progressed into programming, which is, I imagine, a very different world. What are the key differences to somebody just trying to sort of perhaps even be interested in following a similar career path to your own, Katie? What would be the key differences in roles or responsibilities
between a manager and then a promoter? So it's interesting. You know, one of the differences, which if any manager is listening, they will call me and kill me after this. But one of the differences is you actually are in a position more of power, to be quite blunt and frank about it, on the promoter side, because you get to decide who it is that conducts, who it is that performs, and what they perform. I mean, really, in a nutshell. Yeah, some people do it in a nasty way. Most of us don't. Most of us do it in a very subtle, kind, warm way, because you can say, well, I know that he really wants to conduct Brahms too, but unfortunately, we've already got that scheduled, or we just did it last season. Well, the manager and the conductor have no idea about that, truly. I mean, you just may not want Brahms too. So there are ways, you know, you are in the driver's seat in a sense. And that's sort of, that is for me, I enjoyed that, because as I mentioned in the previous, when we were talking about, you know, how I changed into this career, I do really want to make an impact. And so to make that impact, you sort of have to be in the driver's seat. You know, you have to be in the position of saying, well, how can we change programming? And that's what we're going through right now. You know, how can we change programming? How can we make it more attractive to the audience? Are we really programming in a way that is responsible for what our community needs? And in that driver's seat, you have the power to do that. You know, you've the power to have the power to move that needle. So that's sort of one of the differences, and it's definitely more creative. But in the same breath, I'll also say, as a manager, the one thing that's so beautiful about a manager, you know, if you do have the patience and you do stick it out, my gosh, they're traveling around the world all the time. And they really have this beautiful connection with their artists. It's the artists adore them and trust them with their lives. And that connection doesn't happen overnight. You know, that's built with trust. And that's something really beautiful about being a manager as well, because, you know, as I, you know, say in my high chair here, oh, I'm in the position of power, but technically they also have quite a lot of power as well, because if they are unhappy about something, I promise you, the artist will be more likely to listen to them than they will be to listen to me, because they built that years of trust with them. So, you know, it depends what you're looking for. If you want that sort of relationship with several different people, traveling the world, wining and dining, doing all those kind of very glamorous things, but then there's, you know, negotiating contracts and fees, and it gets a little bit nasty every now and then. If you're looking for that, then yeah, a manager is right for you. For me, I was looking for the creative aspect. When I left the performance world, it wasn't because I didn't enjoy it. It was just, I wanted to do something different and I wanted to make an impact. So I still needed to feed my creative side. And that's, you know, why I think I was drawn to programming, because my creative side continued to be fed, and I could be at rehearsals and I could be at concerts. People ask me all the time, do you miss playing? Do you miss performance? And I really don't, because I feel like I'm a part of it. You know, I'm sitting in rehearsals and performance all the time, and I'm working with the artist to decide what they should perform and conduct and all of that. So I don't feel like it's a missing piece in my life.
Absolutely, and you're so involved in the creative process, as you said, of deciding who gets to play, of putting together the season and the program and the concerts, that when you're at the concert, you almost feel that this is your performance as well as the people on
Yeah,
stage. This is, you've created this concept, so it's your baby as
yeah,
much as the people on stage.
yeah,
And so
yeah.
your career has really kept you very close to that sense of performance and sense of being on
Absolutely,
stage, which you started
absolutely,
out with.
absolutely.
And I think it's
Which
really,
also has the terrifying aspect of it too, because
oh
you
yeah,
sit there nail biting
yeah, will this
because
work?
you think, are
Yeah,
they going to like this? Is this
yeah.
going to? And there's been several bombs where I've sat in the audience and gone, wow, that did not work. Oh my gosh, let's just get through this weekend.
Yeah, or it may work for some people and may not work for others. I mean, I
Yeah,
do a bit of programming too, and I know that you're never going to please everybody all the time. Some people
no,
will find fault with certain programs, but you have to also take risks, I think, and push the boat out and juxtapose
absolutely.
odd pieces and commission new work and do all those things that are
Hmm.
expected. But I think it's really interesting that you had that short time at HP in London because you saw it from the side of the artist
Oh yeah,
and the manager, if you like, looking for the work, and then you saw it now from the side of the orchestra taking. So it has allowed you to interact with managers in a very
oh yeah,
favorable way, I think, because you've been there, you've been in that
absolutely.
seat, and so
Absolutely. I mean, I'm
it's
so
great.
grateful of that short time there. They really did teach me so much,
Hmm.
so much. And I've kept in touch with all of my HP colleagues, and they continue to teach me a lot. They really do
Sure,
know
sure.
the
Yeah.
industry. So spending that year there was a
Mhm.
great foundation for me.
Mm. Looking at the sort of more general question, looking at the European sort of way of life musically, culturally, and comparing it to the American way, how would you compare them? I mean, looking at it
Mm,
from here, there's sort of a big difference in the funding model, I would say. I mean, all the
yeah.
orchestras here in Europe are very much state or radio or funded. A lot of public money goes in. My impression is in the States, a lot of philanthropy, a lot of private donors.
Yes.
Um, what other big differences are there in the approach, say, to educational outreach, to
Hmm.
programming, to fundraising? How would you
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and to add, I've never been fortunate enough to work for a European orchestra, so
Sure.
it's sort of secondhand information that I know of how they function.
Hmm.
But one of the major differences you've already mentioned, and that is really fundraising, and also hierarchy in a sense, between the board and the music director.
Hmm.
So, which I'll come back to in a moment, but in terms of programming, it really depends, I think, which European city you're in as well.
Sure.
We often have this sense that, and I had it too, and I kind of learned this over the years. You have this sense that anything you program within the classical music repertoire will sell in Europe. And it's actually not quite the case. There are some cities in some Mediterranean countries. I mean, I'm married to a man from Greece, and he tells me it was a struggle. And, truthfully, growing up in Dublin, I think it is a bit of a struggle with classical music. If you're in Germany, of course, everything's going to sell because that is a part of their history so much. So it really depends which city, but certainly in the US, if you're not in the major cities like Chicago, Boston, New York, it is a bit of a challenge with programming because it's really not a part of their history. And they're embracing classical music as a European art form, which is going through quite a lot of turmoil at the moment, given everything that's happening with social unrest and Black Lives Matter movement. So really, there's a little bit of a kind of a push away of that European tradition right now. And I know that's one of the questions later on, so I won't go too far into that, but that's an interesting sort of aspect that orchestras are facing in the US right now, where there's this feeling of, well, this is this elite European tradition. So is that really our tradition? And I think we're changing that approach. And that does not mean that we all of a sudden don't play Mahler anymore, but we're just looking at it in a different way. So we do have more of a challenge with programming. I think educational aspects, I get the impression that they are quite similar. I mean, there's a lot of community engagement happening in the US right now. And I specifically say community engagement because now to say community outreach is actually offensive, you know.
Right.
So we're really going through a lot of changes right now. But there's a lot of community engagement going to the public schools, trying to have schools come into us. I mean, with the Indianapolis Symphony Orchestra, and it was the same in Pittsburgh, we had 12 concerts spread over 2 months. And at each concert, we had about 1,000 kids come in. And they're coming in, they're bussed in from all these different schools. It's actually gorgeous. And that yellow bus that you see on movies, I mean, that's, I see it pass by my house all the time. You know, it is very classic American, and you see all these yellow buses and all these kids offloaded, and you get 1,000 kids per concert, and you do that 12 times. And that's only one educational segment. I mean, there are several others. We have this Teddy Berry series where we get the musicians to go to public libraries and to play for very, very young kids. But I know that's very similar in Ireland. I remember when I was working as an usher for the NCH that we had to do these Saturday mornings where these kids came in and they played with different kind of instruments and whatnot. So that's similar. The size of the organization, from my impression, is that in the US it's quite a bit bigger. No surprise. Yeah. Quite a bit bigger. You
lots
know,
of vice presidents and presidents and all.
Yes, lots of vice presidents and presidents and all of that. You know, there's like in our organization at the ISO, there's 50 staff members, whereas in European orchestras, I'm told often, you know, you might have 10. You know, so it's quite different, which at times is a bit frustrating for me because, you know, when you hear American colleagues say that they're slammed and that they're struggling and that they can't do that. And I just kind of think, well, how are the European orchestras doing it when they just have 10 people? But I try not to be that snobby European in the room as much as I can. But really, the biggest differences back to that are fundraising and the music director. So there is really no state funding, very minimal from the National Endowment of Arts, which is the government funding. I mean, a small percentage comes from that. It's really the majority of it is based on funding. Even ticket sales, to be honest, we don't rely on ticket sales so much. I mean, I think about 35% of our annual funding is from ticket sales, only 35%. And that's on a good year. So you're really relying, and then 10, 15% from arts funding organizations. So you're relying on people opening their wallets. And that, I mean, you know, some of these donors can give several $1 million to the organization.
It's unheard of.
Or it really is, or they leave it in their will. You know, that's very common, you know, that's planned giving. And there's actually a specific department in the development department for planned giving, so that you're sort of it's a little bit morbid when you think about it, but you're proactively engaging with a donor or a patron that you know from research has quite a bit of money and that really supports the arts. And so that then they plan that whenever that day sadly comes, that they will give. I mean, Philadelphia, I think, got, I can't remember the exact figure, but millions, you know, 50 million from a planned giving gift recently. And that saved them. You know, it meant all of a sudden they were just in great shape again, because typically we're not in great shape. Unfortunately, the musicians in the US are paid significantly more than they are throughout Europe. They have quite a high salary. And while that's totally deserved, it's a little unbalanced. It really is. So that makes it challenging that, you know, you've got your revenue is mostly coming from contributed revenue. So from the goodness of the old lady who lives up the street. And then you've got 80, 90, 100 musicians that their base salary is, depending where you are, somewhere between 70 to 100K. And then they get paid overscale on top of that.
Wow.
So that's just their base salary. And then they get overscale on top of it, and health insurance and retirement and all that. So it's expensive. It's very expensive. And so that's why so often you see orchestras in the US going on strike, because inevitably every 3 years approximately, you have to sit at the negotiating table and you have to negotiate with the musicians that are a part of the AFFM, which is a union. And of course, you're always trying to take something away from them. And sometimes it works well if you've got a great CEO who's got a good relationship with them, and sometimes it goes really badly. And then they're out picketing and striking because they're not getting their pension, or they're getting a 30% cut from their salary, or whatever the case may be. So it's quite bumpy, and honestly, the financial model doesn't really work because it's just, as I say, it's so unbalanced. You know, the funding is great, but we need to do more of that. And really the state needs to step in more and kind of look to the European model. But then we also have to sort of balance the musician side a little bit, not necessarily take away from the salary, but maybe be more proactive about how we're using their time, rather than just coming in for rehearsals and concerts, maybe engaging with the community a lot more to really build the funding. So,
and is there a lot of pressure being put on, say, the city, the state, or the federal government in a concerted effort from orchestras around the states, for example, to increase or to even get any state funding money?
There is now. Actually, the pandemic helped that a lot, because the pandemic showed how vulnerable we are. I mean, we had to just close our doors. I mean, it's the same for our home, I know. We had to just close our doors, and a lot of orchestras have what's called an endowment, and several orchestras dipped into their endowment. We did not, but that meant that our musicians were not paid for were paid very little for an entire year, very, very small amount for an entire year, because we refused to dip into our endowment, because we felt if we did that, we would dig ourselves further into the hole. Some orchestras did dip in, and they're hoping that they'll recover from it. But there was a big rally to get the government to give more money. And there are organizations set up to do that, that are established to build more money from the NEA. And that was in jeopardy at one point with our previous president. But fortunately, it's back on track again. Our current president is very understanding and proud of the arts, which is a really great thing. And so we are pushing, but it's a mindset. Unfortunately,
all the tax people pay in America, all that tax
exactly,
government, and none of it, or very, very little of it, going back into the arts and to the orchestras, which are for the people.
It's a huge problem.
It depends so much on philanthropy. It's really really
there was actually she's an incredible manager, Charlotte Lee. She has her own company here, Primo Artists, and she just put together a huge petition that she brought right up to the government and insisted that artists actually needed to be supported, because they were cut off at the knees. I mean, it was actually really, not to be dark and dreary on this lovely call, but we closed our doors on March 13th. Our musicians were paid for the first week, and then we invoked force majeure. And then we were able to get funding because we applied for this PPP. So we got 2.9 million. So we were able to take everyone back for 8 weeks and pay them at 75% of their salary, because the funding through the pandemic did come through. But the artists did not get that. Force majeure was invoked immediately that week, because it lists in the force majeure clause that it's a pandemic. And so they were not paid. And then agencies had to close down. Columbia Artists, which was there for, I think, 90 years, closed through the pandemic. So Charlotte Lee really kind of gathered a lot of the agents together and said, this is not right. This is our livelihood, and this is the livelihood of the artists. And you love to come and see Yuja Wang and Yo-Yo Ma, Renee Fleming, and all of this stuff. But we have a responsibility to look after them. You can't just cut them off at the knees and not pay them because of a global pandemic. I mean, I know everyone has suffered from it, but my heart really broke for artists through it, because they don't have an endowment and they don't have a board that's going to be able to give them some money. They were really on their own.
I think the worst thing that I recognized, I was working online in the last while a lot. and had the opportunity to speak to fantastic artists, such as, for example, Gary Hoffman, or, you know, I mean, just people who are more world renowned seems like a pithy way of talking about them. There are people who have in excess of 100 concerts a year, who have worked their entire lives, who have given everything to be on stage or for their students. And by the time I spoke to Gary in May of last year, and that was 2.5 months around into the pandemic, he was just saying, well, he hasn't been paid since March 13th. And there was nothing on the cards for him to be. And that's one of many stories like that. And what I found so unfortunate was that some of the people we look up to most in the world of classical music, as far as solo artists are concerned, people who we aspire or who we might tell our students to, you know, I mean, we all know that we had as teenagers, and we know that our students have role models. And these people were, that was the new face of unemployment, of like, in the sense of nothing coming in. Nobody, no union, no voice for them. It's interesting to see that that was something that was also echoed in the States. Because it was
it was bad because, and this is, I think, for people who are listening and watching to understand that, you know, to call, to have Finghin come and do a week with us, or Gwendolyn to come and do a week with us. It is now August 21. If I was hiring both of you to come and play for a week with the Indianapolis Symphony, which is what is happening in your career, you're getting the week in maybe May 23, September 24. So think how far out that is. And if your entire 2021 season was cancelled, so September 2020 through June 2021, if that entire season was cancelled, the first thing that we are doing as promoters is trying to reschedule that cancel season. So several artists are being pushed years out and have no income coming in. And unfortunately, the managers are suffering from that too. You know, managers, their bills are paid from taking 10 or 15% commission from the artist. And they work incredibly hard for that. I know sometimes managers have a bad rap. I mean, they really work so hard for their artists, and they give their entire lives to them. And that money just also disappears for them too. And it was eye-opening for the arts. And I hope that as we start to get back to normal again, which is happening very slowly, I hope as we start to get back to normal that certain things like that will change, so that we're not in that position again. It's just not right.
Can I ask a question before I ask a question that we told you about? It's just very interesting to know the community that you are part of. Will they be aware of these things happening to your organization, or to musicians or artists, or, like you mentioned, big international management companies that are literally, after nearly a century, not able to cope? Or is it something that you feel you can or should sensitize your audience to?
Yeah, unfortunately, there is a small group that is aware, but it's a very small group. I mean, let's look to the city of Indianapolis, which is a great small city, full of young professionals. We call them, this is very American to do this, so I apologize, but we do call them culturally aware non-attendees, CANAs. We love to do that all the time. So we call them CANAs, culturally aware non-attendees. And there are several of them in the city of Indianapolis because it's full of young professionals who have well-paid jobs, no kids, so they have their Friday and Saturday nights free, and potentially are single. So they're also wanting to meet other people, and they're not attending because the culture in the city is sports. You know, you go to see a Pacers game or you go to see a Colts game. So when you talk to people in the city of Indianapolis about the orchestra, this still happens, and it frustrates me, but it also just encourages me and feeds me to just keep going and to keep getting the message out, where they say, oh, is that your full-time job? You play in the orchestra full-time? That's what you do full? Yes, it is. That, and they work very hard all the time, all year round. So there is unfortunately a mindset, and they would not have been aware, you know, that if the orchestra wasn't playing, that meant that all of these musicians were out of work. I mean, take, for example, our principal tuba and his wife, who's a violist in the viola section. They're both full-time musicians in the orchestra. They have 3 beautiful kids, and they were out of work. Can you imagine both members of the couple out of work with 3 kids? They almost had to sell their house. And what they did was they tried to pick up teaching jobs anywhere they possibly could. And then they, of course, dipped into their savings. So trying to get that message out to our public is important. But I think our approach now is, rather than saying, oh, woe is me, please help these poor musicians. They're actually not poor musicians. They're very well educated. They're highly specialized. They train for their entire lives to do what they do. Instead of saying, oh, poor musicians, we're taking an approach that is ensuring the value we have for our community. And we have lost sight of that. In the US specifically, we've lost sight of what the purpose of an arts organization in a community is. You know, we started to just program Beethoven 9, Dvorak New World, Beethoven 5, Tchaikovsky 4, 5, or 6, though even 4 and 6 struggle, you know, really if you want a guarantee, just stick with 5. You know, so we started to program in that way that's so boring, that would just be a guarantee of people coming to the concerts. Well, our audience aren't stupid. Sooner or later that gets boring, and sooner or later it's not sustainable, actually. And we were going in automatic pilot to just be able to get the splashy name on the marketing materials so that we could get 70-80% capacity in the hall. Now we're switching that mindset. We're saying, well, what is it that we're supposed to do for our community? What is our responsibility socially to our community and to the country at wide? And I think this has been a perfect storm. I keep referring to it as a perfect storm. The arts was struggling, was not selling very well at all. And we were doing the same old, you know, Rossini Overture, Tchaikovsky Violin Concerto, Brahms Symphony, all great works, please don't get me wrong, but it's just churned out over and over and over again. And we were just saying, well, whatever just sells. Then the pandemic hit and we realized how vulnerable we were. And we were all sent to work from home. And then the Black Lives Matter movement happened, and that was enormous throughout the entire world. But the 2 things sort of came together of, well, as an arts organization, aren't we supposed to be teaching empathy? Aren't we supposed to be teaching culture? And aren't we supposed to be the ones showing our community all of these different personalities, different races, different cultures? We weren't doing that. We were going on automatic pilot to whatever looks flashy on a marketing piece and whatever would sell. And so that sort of, the Black Lives Matter movement made us wake up terrified, you know, because we were being attacked in the press, rightly so. And we woke up terrified of, oh my gosh, we're already struggling, and then this is happening, and we're being called racist. Arts organizations that are just elite Europeans, we have to change our mindset, and we have to reset ourselves to remember what it is that we're supposed to do. What is our responsibility when we program? We're supposed to be sending a message out when we program, not just paint by numbers. And the pandemic allowed us the time to really think through that as well, because we weren't, you know, oh, let's just get through this weekend. Oh, let's just get through next weekend. Oh my God, let's program next season. Oh my God, keep going, keep going. Dvorak 9, Tchaikovsky 5, Beethoven 5, go, 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 go. You know, we were able to stop and breathe and say, what do we want to do? What do we want to mean to our community? And what is our purpose as an arts organization? And that's been really rewarding from all of this to me, because it's allowed us the time to really think through that. And I think a lot of arts organizations are going to change. I know the Dallas Symphony Orchestra, which I'm so excited to work for this coming September, I know that that's their goal. They want to be cutting edge. They want to move that needle.
They've done that in more ways than one, Katie. We've been talking about social change. You've spoken about unrest. We've spoken about time in as much as centuries age-old ideas existing. And we've spoken about a push to make sure that we work for and with our communities, no matter who we are and where we are, in your case, as Vice President in Dallas of the Symphony Orchestra. I have a question, of course, that's burning from the very second that Finghin and I were sitting going, who do we want to talk to? Who do we think is changing the world? Who do we think is actually showing a brave new face to classical music and blowing off that perceived dust? Katie McGuinness, who we've grown up with and we're very proud of. And it need not, it's pretty obvious, Katie, that you are female. And I think it's pretty obvious that you are somebody who is extremely responsible and aware of the authority and the impact, the change that she can make. And it's so refreshing to hear you speak. It's actually giving me some hope. Sun is coming out here now. But what I'd love to know, what does it feel like as a woman working in what is still a male-dominated arena? Particularly when it comes to large orchestras, symphony orchestras, whether we're looking at conductors and the bias towards male appreciation, which is fine. I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm just wondering about equality and what does it actually feel like once you're in that position as a woman, as a young woman, as a foreign young woman in America at that. Do you feel like you have to behave in a certain way? Do you feel that you can make change? Are you seeing changes in that arena as well, that there is more equality?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a male-dominated industry. I think I have been very fortunate in my part of the industry because there are a lot of female leaders leading the way for us. I mean, my CEO, Kim Multemi, obviously female. The CEO of Minnesota Orchestra is female. The CEO of Pittsburgh Symphony Orchestra is female. One of the best CEOs, arguably in the world, was the CEO of LA Phil and is now the CEO of New York Phil, Deborah Borda. She's one of the most powerful women in our industry. Deborah Rudder, she's the CEO of the Kennedy Center. So in my part of the industry, I have to say I've been very fortunate. I've never quite felt that. But there is definitely a struggle for conductors, for female conductors. It's a matter of being proactive about it. It's a matter of proactively pursuing a female conductor, trying to just not take the obvious choice of the list that's in front of you and instead really actively pursuing female conductors. The same for composers, female composers. There's a huge change with that. That wasn't there in the past. I mean, now if you look at female composers, Hannah Kendall, Jessie Montgomery, Anna Klein, Augusta Reed Thomas, I mean, it goes on, and they're fabulous composers. Sorry, I think it's a conductor. Fabulous composers, really, really fabulous. But you're right, Gwendolyn. I mean, it takes time and it takes a lot of self-confidence. I think I've been very fortunate in always having female presence around me and female mentors. I mean, even to look to my own family. My mother was a very successful, very smart doctor. I am one of 6 kids, and that's 5 girls and 1 boy. And all 4 of my sisters are incredibly ambitious and hardworking and really kind of leaders in their field. So I think I was really lucky to always be surrounded by female mentors. And then even in work, you know, between meeting Anne Fuller, Laurie Carr, Kira Higgins, and then going to work for Linda Marks at Harrison Parrott, I feel personally that I've been very lucky, but I have watched all of them really have to sort of stand their ground in moments where you do feel like just because I'm getting heated right now doesn't mean that I'm some female. I'm not going to say the bad word. You know, it means that I'm angry right now, actually. And it's nothing to do with the time of the month or anything silly like that. You know, I am angry and I'm in a position of power, and you really have to stand strong with that a lot. But I think things are changing. Look at our vice president here, Kamala Harris. I mean, things are really changing. And I think people are realizing that women do have, to generalize, have a better ability of just listening and understanding and being more empathetic and being a little bit more adventurous and innovative. So it's changing, thankfully, though it's an uphill battle each day.
Wonderful, Katie. There's been so many interesting nuggets to come out of this conversation, and there's so much more we could talk about. And I think one of the great challenges you've sort of touched upon is that, you know, the pressure on orchestras to fill holes by putting on Dvorak and Tchaikovsky and Brahms, and now the other pressure maybe to become more relevant to the American communities, maybe by presenting Black or female minorities, ethnic minorities, and how will that affect the box office? You know, it's I think the way through is not easy. It's going to be challenging for everybody. I think it's very good that we're made to think in these ways, but I suppose at the bottom of it all, what we are is, you know, a European art form. It is what it is. You can't try to make it something it isn't, and that's the difficulty I think that we all face with programming, is making something that at its core, you know, is a lot of white men who wrote wonderful music, which is kind of classical music is at its base, at its most basic form. How to make that relevant to everybody today, and that is
it's so true.
That's the big challenge of 2020 and 2021.
It's so true, and I know we're running out of time, so I will just very quickly say you're absolutely right. And I think what our approach should be is, if somebody says to me, dead white European composer, male European composer, if somebody says that to me again, I really will get very angry. I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
That is disrespectful. Mahler, Brahms, Beethoven, there's a reason we celebrated Beethoven's 250th anniversary.
Exactly.
But it doesn't mean that we can't pair Beethoven with William Grant Still or Joseph Boulogne or Anna Klein or Florence Price. I think we need to do a better job. I mean, I just programmed this coming season, Geroid Tate. He is a Native American composer from Chickasaw Nation, unbelievable composer, but he would be lost in the mix. And he's going to be paired with Jessie Montgomery, a commission of her piano concerto, an African-American female composer, and Dvorak 9 in the second half, so that we can actually really hear what Dvorak 9 was writing about. Sure. African-American, Native American themes. Yeah. You know, there are ways to do it without saying no more dead white male European composers. Yeah. That's nonsense. Yeah. But let's incorporate more diversity with it. So,
well, on that moment of positivity and hope, I think it just remains for us to thank you, Katie, for taking the time in what was an early morning start for you in Pittsburgh. It's been wonderful to talk to you. I think it's, you know, this master course at the National Concert Hall is geared towards many different audiences, but at its core are students, and we want to show people what can happen when you're a young girl growing up in Dublin wanting to be a pianist, and you end up as vice president of artistic planning at the Dallas Symphony, and you're still such a young person, and you know what you've achieved in a short time is really truly inspirational for so many people, and I think you've shown a lot of that today in your conversation with us, and we thank you for taking the time to speak to us both, and we wish you the very best with the move to Dallas, and we're sure that you will make a very big impression.
Thank you so much. Very lucky. I appreciate your time, and for everyone listening as well, thank you so much. It's given me a feeling as if I'm sort of home, which has been really special. And I do want to say to anyone who is listening, if there is any student out there listening, please find a way to reach out to me. If you want any advice or any guidance, I would be happy to. So thank you both so much. It's such a pleasure to spend this time with you, and I miss you all so much, but I know I'll be home again very soon.
Thank you, Katie. We'll see you very soon again.
Take care. All the best. Thanks.